life of a long-haul trucker is a lonely one. You spend days, sometimes weeks, on the road with only the hum of the engine and the endless stretch of asphalt for company. My name is Jack, and I've been driving for over 20 years. I've seen my fair share of strange things out on those empty highways, but nothing, absolutely nothing, compares to what happened one stormy night on a desolate stretch of Route 66. It was late October, the kind of night where the rain doesn't just fall. It attacks. Sheets of water hammered against my windshield, and the wipers fought a losing battle. The wind howled like a wounded animal, making my 18-wheeler groan and sway. I was hauling a load of produce from California to Chicago, pushing through the night to make my deadline. The road was slick and treacherous, and visibility was almost zero. Most sensible drivers had already pulled over for the night, but I was stubborn and behind schedule. I was somewhere deep in the wilds of Arizona, miles from the nearest town. The only light came from my own headlights, cutting a weak, shimmering path through the darkness. The radio was just static, adding to the eerie atmosphere. That's when I saw her. At first, she was just a flicker at the edge of my high beams, a pale shape against the inky black of the night. As I got closer, the shape resolved into a person. A woman, standing on the shoulder of the highway, drenched and shivering. My first thought was, what in the world is anyone doing out here? In this weather? It was dangerous, reckless even. But my second thought, the one that overrode the first, was that I couldn't just leave her there. My rig slowed to a crawl, the air brakes hissing in protest. I pulled over just ahead of her and rolled down the passenger side window. The wind and rain immediately rushed in, cold and sharp. "Hey, you need a ride?" I yelled over the storm. She looked up, her face pale and streaked with rain. She was young, maybe in her early 20s, wearing a simple white dress that was now soaked through and clinging to her slender frame. Her long, dark hair was plastered to her face, and her eyes were large and dark, filled with a sadness so profound it felt like a physical blow. She didn't say anything, just nodded slowly. I pushed the passenger door open. Get in. You'll catch your death out here." She moved with a strange, almost graceful slowness, climbing into the cab. As she settled into the seat, a chill that had nothing to do with the storm swept through the truck. The smell of rain and damp earth filled the air, along with something else, something floral, like old wilting roses. "Thanks," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the din of the storm. It was a soft, melodic voice, but it held a strange, hollow quality. "No problem," I said, trying to sound cheerful. "Name's Jack. Where are you headed?" She just stared out the windshield, watching the hypnotic rhythm of the wipers. "Just down the road," she said finally. My car broke down. I glanced back through my side mirror. There was no car. The road behind us was empty, swallowed by the rain and darkness. Maybe she'd walked a ways from it, I reasoned. "Well, the next town is still a good 30 miles out. I can drop you at the diner there. You can call for a tow." She nodded again, a small, almost imperceptible movement. She didn't offer her name, and I didn't press. There was something about her that made me uneasy. She was completely still, her hands resting in her lap, her wet dress pooling on the seat. She didn't shiver or complain about the cold. She just sat there, a silent, sorrowful statue. We drove in silence for a few minutes. The only sounds were the storm and the rumble of my engine. The quiet was becoming uncomfortable, so I tried to make conversation. "Rough night to be stranded. You from around here?" She turned her head to look at me, and for the first time, I got a good look at her face in the dim glow of the dashboard lights. She was beautiful, in a classic, haunting sort of way, but her skin was unnaturally pale, almost translucent. And those eyes, they seemed to see right through me. "I used to be," she said, her voice a low murmur. "A long time ago." A chill went down my spine. A long time ago? She didn't answer. Instead, she pointed a slender finger towards a turnoff I hadn't noticed. You can let me out here. I frowned. Here? There's nothing here but an old cemetery road. I could just make out a rusty, wrought iron gate half hidden by overgrown trees. This is where I need to go, she insisted, her voice gaining a hint of urgency. I hesitated. Leaving a young woman at the entrance to a cemetery in the middle of a storm felt wrong on every level. But the look in her eyes was compelling. It wasn't a request. It was a command. Against my better judgment, I slowed the truck and pulled over onto the muddy shoulder. Are you sure about this? I asked one last time. I'm sure, she said. She turned to me, and for a fleeting moment, a faint smile touched her lips. It didn't reach her eyes. Thank you for the ride, Jack. You're a kind man. She opened the door and stepped out into the raging storm as silently as she had entered. Before I could say another word, she closed the door, and the cab felt instantly, unnervingly empty and warm again. The scent of rain and roses vanished. I watched in my mirror as she walked towards the cemetery gates. She didn't run or try to shield herself from the rain. She just walked, a white figure against the dark, until she passed through the gates and was swallowed by the shadows of the ancient tombstones. Then she was gone. I sat there for a long moment, the engine idling, my heart pounding in my chest. What had just happened? My logical mind was screaming at me. A girl with a broken-down car. That's all it was. But my gut was telling me something else. Something was terribly wrong. Shaking my head, I put the truck in gear and pulled back onto the highway. I couldn't shake the image of her. Her sad eyes, her pale face. The 30 miles to the town of Winslow felt like 100. When I finally saw the welcoming glow of the 24-hour diner, I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. I parked my rig and practically ran inside, desperate for the light, the warmth, and the presence of other human beings. The diner was cozy and bright. A handful of other truckers were nursing cups of coffee, and a waitress with a tired but friendly face was wiping down the counter. I slid onto a stool. Coffee, I croaked. Black. Rough night out there, honey, the waitress said, pouring a steaming cup. Her name tag read Brenda. You have no idea, I muttered, wrapping my cold hands around the mug. I took a long sip, letting the hot liquid chase away some of the chill. After a few minutes of just sitting there, gathering my thoughts, I had to ask. I had to know. Brenda, I started, trying to sound casual. This is going to sound crazy, but I just gave a ride to a young woman. Picked her up a few miles back. She was wearing a white dress. Said her car broke down. I dropped her off at the old cemetery east of here. Brenda stopped wiping the counter. She put the rag down and looked at me, her friendly expression gone, replaced by something I couldn't quite read. Pity? Fear? A young woman in a white dress? She asked, her voice low. Did she have long, dark hair? And sad eyes? My blood ran cold. Yeah, that's her. How did you know? Brenda sighed and leaned against the counter. You're not the first, you know. Every few years, on a stormy night just like this one, some trucker comes in here telling the same story. She lowered her voice even more, and the other truckers at the counter seemed to lean in, even though they'd surely heard it all before. The story goes that about 50 years ago, a young woman was on her way to her wedding. She was driving down that same stretch of road when a storm hit. Her car skidded off the road and crashed. She didn't make it. They say she died right there, on the shoulder of the highway, in her wedding dress. My coffee mug clattered against the saucer. My hands were shaking. Brenda continued, her eyes fixed on mine. Ever since then, her spirit wanders that road on the anniversary of her death, looking for a ride home. She always asks to be dropped off at the cemetery, because that's where she's buried. The diner was silent, except for the humming of the refrigerator and the rain lashing against the windows. I just stared at Brenda, my mind refusing to process what she was saying. A ghost? I didn't believe in ghosts. I was a practical man. A man of diesel and steel. One of the other truckers spoke up, his voice a low rumble. Heard that story for years. Old Man Hemlock swore he gave her a ride back in '98. Said she left his jacket on her gravestone. My eyes widened. My jacket. In my haste and confusion when she got out, I'd completely forgotten. I had taken off my favorite leather jacket and draped it over her shoulders to keep her warm when she first got in. It wasn't on the passenger seat. I fumbled in my wallet and threw some bills on the counter. "Thanks for the coffee," I said, my voice hoarse. I had to go back. I had to see for myself. It was insane, but I had to know. Brenda just gave me a sad look. "Be careful out there, Jack." The drive back to the cemetery was the most terrifying 10 minutes of my life. The storm hadn't let up. Every shadow seemed to twist into a menacing shape. When I reached the cemetery gates, I pulled over, my headlights cutting through the rain to illuminate the rows of old, weathered tombstones. My heart was hammering against my ribs as I grabbed my flashlight and got out of the truck. The wind nearly tore the door from my hand. I pushed through the rusty gate and stepped onto the hallowed ground. The beam of my flashlight danced over the graves, names and dates worn away by time. And then I saw it. Draped over a simple gray headstone near the back fence was my leather jacket. It was soaked through, but it was unmistakably mine. My breath hitched in my throat. With trembling hands, I shone the light on the name carved into the stone. Eliza May Thompson, beloved daughter, born 1951, died 1973. The date of her death was today's date, October 27th. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, frozen in the rain, staring at my jacket on the grave of the woman who had sat beside me in my truck less than an hour ago. I didn't take the jacket back. It felt wrong, like I'd be taking something that belonged to her now. I slowly backed away, got into my truck, and drove. I drove all night, not stopping until the sun came up, putting as many miles as I could between me and that haunted stretch of Arizona highway. I've never driven that route again. I'll take the long way around, add a whole day to my trip if I have to. Some people say it was just a prank or a story cooked up by lonely truckers, but I know what I saw. I know who I gave a ride to that night. And sometimes, when I'm driving alone on a dark, rainy night, I can almost smell the faint scent of old roses. And I check my passenger seat, half expecting to see her sitting there, with her sad eyes and her whispered request to go home. Thanks for listening, and stay safe out there on the road.